what is that smell? I am definitely getting a hint of a deal. Oh wait, it's more than a hint. Yeah, these are the best deals, and not just this season, but all year long. In all seriousness, the smartest shoppers know that you get the brands you love with the most savings and cash back with Rakuten. And I know I'm certainly interested in sniffing out those deals. Start getting cash back at your favorite stores like Urban Outfitters, Petco, even Expedia, and getting cash back doesn't mean you have to miss out on sales because those can be stacked right on top. It's easy to use and based on a simple idea. Stores pay Rakuten for sending them shoppers, and Rakuten shares the money with you as cashback through PayPal or check. Smells like a perfect deal to me. Download the free Rakuten app and never miss a deal. Or go to Rakuten.com to start getting the most bang for your buck. That's Rakuten.
And we're back with Canva Presents Secret Sounds Work Edition. Caller, guess this sound.
It's a mouse click.
So close! That's actually publishing a website with Canva Docs. Next caller.
Definitely a mouse click.
Nice try. It was sorting 100 sticky notes with a Canva whiteboard. We also would have accepted resizing a Canva video into 10 different sizes.
What? No way.
Yes way. One click can go a long way. Love your work at canva.com.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and today I'm so delighted with the author interview that you get to hear. Maybe as delighted as I was to get to do this author interview. So I got to speak with author Hallie Rubenhold, whose name you might be familiar with because she wrote, she has a new book coming out, and that's what we're going to be talking about. But where I first really came across her name was her previous book, The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper, which it was an outstanding book. It came out several years ago, and it's really up there for me just in terms of like women's history books. And what I found really moving about that book was it was looking at each of these women's lives and really not taking anything for granted, who they were. You know, there's so many people who, with the victims of Jack the Ripper, where it's just kind of like, oh, well, they were sex workers, or like for somehow it's just kind of like they deserved it in some way. And she really looked at who these women were, how they got to the point where they were sleeping on the street of Whitechapel at the time that Jack was there. And each part of the book, she tells a woman's story and then it stops. She doesn't talk about their murder. She doesn't get into like who was Jack the Ripper or like why were they killed. She just tells these women's stories and that's that. And I found the book so good and so interesting in that way. And it completely changed the way that I think about that era and those crimes. And so I was really excited when I saw that she had a new book coming out, it's a historical book and it involves a crime. But I think fans of true crime would like it, but I also think fans of history would like it because she's really approaching it as a historian. It's called Story of a Murder, The Wives, the Mistress, and Dr. Crippen. And the cover of the book is this very evocative, interesting image of a music hall performer, of a woman from circa 1910 with a lot of expression on her face. She looks really interesting. You want to know her story, and that is the person we're going to be talking about on the episode today, which is the woman so the story of a murder. The person who was murdered is a music hall performer named Belle Elmore. She was murdered by her husband, Dr. Crippen, but, she didn't enter this world as a future murder victim. She entered this world as a person with lots of interesting things about her. And she's honestly such a lovely, interesting woman. And just, I wish in some ways that this was a story of like, look at this cool woman and all the things she did. And she was this vaudeville performer. That's part of this book. And then, of course, she is murdered. But then you get to see how the friends that she had made, the other music hall vaudeville performers, how they really rallied around her and forced the police to investigate it. And they were there every step of the way to ensure that her husband was caught and found guilty of this crime. And so this book is a lot of things. It's a history book about kind of like a place and a time, which is mostly London in 1910. But then it's also about the ways that women's lives unfolded in this era, because along with Belle Elmore, to me, the main character of the book, the main character of today's podcast, Belle Elmore, who does become the murder victim, but we also talk about Ethel Leneve, who is her husband's typist / mistress / next wife. The book also talks about Dr. Crippen's first wife, Charlotte, and just kind of seeing the different ways that these different women did their best to thrive and to follow and to pursue their dreams in an era where there was more opportunity than in some eras, less opportunities than in other eras. Anyway, it's such a book. There's so much in it. And I was like, okay, I'm just having this short conversation with Hallie. What do I want to focus on? And what I really wanted to talk to her about was Belle's story and the story of her and her friends. And that's really what we're going to focus on. So I really am excited for you all to hear this interview. I could not be more excited to have been able to have this conversation. And so please enjoy this conversation with author, historian, Hallie Rubenhold. So I am so delighted today to be joined by the author of Story of a Murder, The Wives, the Mistress, and Dr. Crippen. It's Hallie Rubenhold. Welcome, Hallie.
Hello.
I'm so excited to talk to you about this book. I'm such a fan of yours. I read your previous book, The Five, which recasts the whole story of looking at the women who were killed by Jack the Ripper. And part of what I loved about that book is each story ends and you don't talk about the murder at all. All you do is focus on the women. And in this book as well, I really like the way you stay in the moment with the victim of this murder, Belle, and just really focus on her life because she wasn't living her life future murder victim, like she was a person living her own life. And what I would love to have you talk to people about is just who this woman was, who Belle really was, what you learned about her from your research.
Well, first of all, I think it's really important to kind of start with what was said about her. And one of the things that made me really want to write this book was reading about what was said about her. And it's really horrifying just how victim blamed she was for her own murder. It's absolutely shocking throughout the 20th century what people were saying, that she was this horrible shrew, she was a harridan, she was, a kind of sexually unfaithful to her husband with everyone, she was an alcoholic, she was brash, she was kind of covetous. She was just like the worst example of womanhood you could ever imagine. And because she was the worst example of womanhood you could ever imagine, she had to be punished. She became like this avatar for everything that was horrendous and hideous about the modern woman. And so she just became this hate figure in true crime. And as I was reading that, I was just thinking, this is so unbalanced and this is so bizarre. And I'm sure this cannot be true. But I think one of the things it's always important to bear in mind, I never set out to go and prove something. It's, you have to stay with a completely open mind as a historian and when you're examining the source material. And there may have been people who didn't like Belle. Nobody's a perfect human being. So, of course, I have to be completely open to that. But what was said about her was so shocking and so disproportionately awful that I knew there was another story. And I was completely right that there was a completely different story. And the story of Belle was, well, first of all, I tried to make her into a human being, which she was. She's not just a victim, or, a woman who was asking for it. She was a person, and she was born in Brooklyn to a mother who was German immigrant, and a father who was what would be called a Prussian immigrant. He was from the border of Germany and Poland, and his last name was Makamotzi. And her first name, they called her Kunigunde, which is a German name, but they soon realized that that was not the sort of name that American tongues could get around pretty quickly. And so her name was changed to, they called her Concordia, they called her Corinne, they called her Cora. Cora stuck. But she was brought up in a Brooklyn tenement. And her father died when she was very young, and her mother remarried a man called Frederick Messinger, who was German, and they had a very large family. And when she was about 16, she went out to work. She's about 16, 17 years old. She went out to work and she worked for family, a man who was fairly wealthy. His name was Charles Lincoln, and he was a stove manufacturer, and he was also involved in kind of forwarding the notions of the new ideas around central heating as well, which is how he made all of his money. And he had recently diversified into property and acquisition of property. Now that's important because around about the time that Belle started working for them, he had committed his wife to an asylum indefinitely, and attempts were made to take all of her property. She was quite a wealthy woman, and she had property in Massachusetts. And so Belle was working for him at the time. And we don't know if the relationship was consensual or not, but she soon found herself pregnant by Charles Lincoln.
And she's very 16 or
About
so at this
17,
time,
yeah,
right?
17. So he puts her in her own lodgings. Obviously, this is a problem because he demonstrates no desire to marry her. But he's also entangled. His wife isn't dead; she's in an asylum, and it's decided that she needs an abortion. Now, she has an abortion at the time. It is highly, highly illegal in the state of New York and all over the United States to have an abortion. You can go to prison for 20 years for even attempting an abortion on a woman who may or may not even have been pregnant. But doctors were willing to perform these procedures on women for the right amount of money. There was a man called Dr. Jeffries who performed this on Belle, and he was assisted by another doctor called Hallie Crippen. In the wake of this abortion, Dr. Crippen, who was older than her, he was in his 30s at the time, and she was about 18. Dr. Crippen and Belle started to have a relationship.
And this is just pause. This is the strangest beginning of a relationship to me.
I mean, it's very weird. But this is a very different time. Doctors were regarded with, being a doctor was enormously prestigious. People listened to what doctors said, and also his whole approach was he was very solicitous and very kind towards women, and very charming. People said that he had this sort of charming allure, even though I don't think, and you can look at his photograph, that he was particularly attractive. He was a very small man with a huge kind of walrus mustache and big glasses. But what women found attractive in the late 19th century was a very different thing, I think, from what most of us would find attractive now, because women were taught to be, acquiescent and to be submissive to men, and and a man was supposed to be a provider, and he was supposed to take care of you, and he was supposed to do everything for you. Well, what could be a better example of that than a medical doctor who was going to take care of you? And so they ran away. They went to Jersey City. New Jersey had different laws surrounding marriage at that time. You didn't need to get a marriage license. You could just elope and get married, which is what they did. And that is how the marriage started.
Well, and also the fact they were not courting for years, especially they eloped. So he's in his 30s, she's a teenager, and this is when they get together. And I think in her story, like you see a lot today too, just sort of like an older man and a very young woman. And the older man might like the younger woman because she's so impressionable. Like you can sort of like train her to be the sort of woman you want her to be. And then as she matures and develops her own independent personality, the man kind of sours of her. And I see that in this relationship for sure. But so they move around. But can you talk about he did not want children and she wanted children, and what he did about that?
Yeah, well, this is the thing that I mean, Crippen. So Crippen had a wife before he was married to Belle, and her name was Charlotte Belle, and she was an Irish immigrant who became a nurse. They were married for about 4 years, and she had a son by him called Otto. And then she just died suddenly of what he claimed to be a stroke. on one hand, well, that was written on the death certificate, but he told the trade journals that in the medical journals, he provided an obituary for her, and he said that she died of a heart attack. So that's kind of strange. And so this was in Salt Lake City. She died and was buried within 72 hours in the dead of winter when the ground was still frozen. And she was basically dumped into a pauper's grave with no grave marking at all. So what on earth was going on there? It's entirely possible that he did murder her as well, but it's very hard to find any actual substantial evidence that really kind of points to that absolutely. However, he had one child, and he quickly handed that child off to his parents to raise, and didn't want any more. And so when he married Belle, Belle really wanted children, and she was raised, Victorian women were raised to want to be mothers. That was their primary function, they were told, in life, was to get married and have children. And however, he didn't want any more, so he came up with an excuse for Belle to have her ovaries removed at the age of 21. And the unfortunate thing was, both her mother and her sisters both subsequently said there was absolutely nothing physically wrong with her at all. She didn't have painful periods. She didn't have any problems. And in fact, after the ovaries were removed, Crippen said they were healthy. But what she did actually have also was a prolapsed uterus. And that was never dealt with. And so at the age of 21, she's suddenly thrown into what's called surgical menopause without any, obviously, HRT. And you can imagine how much she suffered as a result of this, but psychologically suffered. And she found the surgery extremely traumatic, so that she talked about it for the rest of her life.
And then she had this unfulfilled maternal instinct. She's a person who really wanted to have children, but also she was raised like in the tenement and everything, like you said, like around a family, around a huge support system. And being with Crippen, she found herself, not only she didn't have children, but she didn't have anyone around her. Yeah. She was quite lonely. So can you explain how they wound up in England, where she was even more isolated?
Yeah, well, so Crippen at the time he had started his career. He had really, he had wanted to be a legitimate doctor, bearing in mind that the field of medicine that he chose was homeopathy, which at the time was considered a legitimate alternative to orthodox medicine. He also at the time had a specialism in obstetrics and gynecology, as well as in the eye and the ear. And so he was kind of trying to make a name for himself as that. And then eventually he gives up on that. We don't know why. Something rather mysterious happens at some point. And he picks up with a man called James Monroe Munyon, who was this incredibly successful patent medicine salesman, complete snake oil salesman who made a ton of money. And really from that point, Crippen just kind of spirals into medical fraud, actual stock fraud, Ponzi schemes, as we would call them today, all sorts of fraud. And that's how he earns his living. So at this time, when he was working for Munyon sends him to London to open up a branch of Munyon's Remedies there. And following Belle's ovarotomy, as it was called, and having been robbed of the opportunity to have children, she quite in this. I think it's just an astonishing thing for her to do, for a woman of that time who would have, completely thrown herself into her husband's career. She decided she was going to become an opera singer. And she took opera lessons, and she really, really worked at this. And he supported that ambition. And then when they moved to London, she realized, well, it's going to be rather hard for me to break into opera here. However, she had been told that music hall, vaudeville, was much easier. And so she reinvented herself again and said, well, I'm going to go on the stage and be a music hall performer now. And she really, like every single time she decides to do something, she just throws herself into it. Absolutely. She's complete gusto. She loves what she does. You know, she wasn't a bad, this is the thing, like there's a lot of mileage that's been got out of like taking pot shots at Belle and saying, oh, she's a terrible, terrible singer. And she was like ridiculously bad. There's absolutely not one iota of evidence that she was bad. In fact, I found quite the contrary. Looking at reviews, it said she got, ovations and she did encores. But much like Hollywood today or anything, it's incredibly hard to break into the music hall, and not everybody soars to the heights of Mary Lloyd or Dan Leno or, all these people who were incredibly famous that we remember today. She was just another music hall performer. And, after, several years, she wasn't making the name for herself that she wanted to. And then she switched again into working for a professional charity called the Music Hall Ladies Guild, which was a charity run by women for women in the music hall who'd fallen on hard times, who, couldn't pay their rent, couldn't pay their doctor's bills, needed coal for their fire, needed clothes for themselves and their children. And she raised money for them, and she became the treasurer of the Music Hall Ladies Guild. And that is where she really found herself and found her métier. She loved it, and she raised a load of money for those who were in difficult times.
And she also found the circle of sort of found family among these women. Like, she found such true, genuine friendships there. It was really lovely to see how she found a purpose for herself, like that when she couldn't be a mother, but she found a way to care for people. But she found these people, she found these friends. That's such a lovely. I heard you on another podcast where you said that's kind of her happy ending. Her landing in this place. Yeah,
completely her happy ending. And what's so nice is, like, obviously, Belle wants to be famous and she wants to be celebrated. Well, the interesting thing is she ends up spending all of her time around these incredibly famous people, and she's embraced in their circle. And so is Crippen. And they throw parties and they go to balls, and this is the Sanger Jeanette wedding, which is really, really amazing, where they these two circus families, because circus was encompassed into the music hall as well, circus acts. And there's this incredible wedding at the Sanger family farm where they house all the animals during the winter. And, they're like giraffes and lions and monkeys at this incredible wedding that's covered in the newspaper. And, she's living her best life. She's having these incredible experiences with these incredibly famous people who are her closest friends.
And she gets an award for being so good at this.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's interesting that, like, shortly before she dies, she is honored. Every year, the Music Hall Ladies Guild have this dinner, and they honor, like, their, like, kind of, I was going to say, like, employee or member of the year. And that year it was Belle. And she was, for everything that she had done for them. And she was awarded that night with this bracelet, and I love it. I just think, like, if we did merch, like, having a gold bangle with the words "To the Hustler" on it would just be the greatest thing. So she was given this bangle that said "To the Hustler," and bouquet of flowers, and a framed letter of appreciation, and a box of gloves, ladies' gloves. And she posed for her picture, and it was in all of the it was in the Era, and in all the trade magazines and the trade papers, and so she was really celebrated, and people knew who she was. And it was, in many ways, like a happy ending, because in a couple months' time she would be murdered.
And that photograph is in the photo section of your book, and she just looks so happy. It's such a lovely picture of her.
Yeah, it feels like a happy ending in that way. I mean, her life ended needlessly early, and under terrible circumstances. But, to have had that triumph shortly before her death, I think was really wonderful.
And so her good friends, the Music Hall Ladies, Belle goes to them. Suddenly they are told by her husband, she's gone to America. She's just left without saying goodbye. She's gone. And the ladies are just like, something's off. Something's wrong.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. It's like, it's the women who are saying, wait a minute, Crippen was saying, oh, well, Belle's gone to America. There's basically this family emergency. She had to go. And the women, her friends, were like, well, this is completely out of character. This is totally out of character. So, she calls us every day. They exchanged letters and postcards every day. They had telephones. They called each other. They sent telegrams to each other. If one or the other was going on a ship and going somewhere, the others would see them off and they'd send them flowers. This was the traditional thing. But she was so close to her friends. And then she just disappears. And from that, they knew there was something wrong. I mean, imagine like your closest friend who messages you all the time, just like, oh, suddenly, they have to go to Cape Town and they haven't sent you a message at all. Like they're not answering any of your messages. And I mean, you would think something was really, really wrong. And that's exactly what the Musical Ladies Guild thought. They knew something was wrong and they started asking questions.
And I love this part. I know I think I saw in one of the articles, one of your interviews, like this has been optioned to be a series, this story. And this part of the story, I was just like, I was thinking to myself before I knew that, I was just like, this needs to be a series because I want to see these women and all the attempts. Like they go to the police don't pay attention to them. They hire a kind of private investigator. Like her friends are determined to get to the bottom of this. And it's it's a testament to how much they cared for her and how much they loved her. And it's also just like a really good tribute to the power of friendship and how Belle really was embraced by this community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the lengths to which these women went is really, really impressive. As you said, they pursued Crippen. They went knocking on his door. They followed him down the hallway. Bear in mind, his offices and the Musical Ladies Guild offices were a couple doors down the hall from each other because Belle had been the one who had secured the office space for them. And so they're on top of him all the time, asking questions and following him around, going to his house. As you said, they hired a private detective who trails him, can't find out anything. They go to Scotland Yard. Scotland Yard dismisses them because they're just, bohemian ladies. And what those sorts of women are like. And then finally, it's not really until Lillian Nash, who was the superstar performer, she was American, and she traveled both sides of the Atlantic all the time, and with her husband, who was her manager. It wasn't until John Nash and Lillian Nash, and John Nash especially, went to Scotland Yard and said, "Look, this is a real problem. Our friend is gone." That Scotland Yard's like, okay, well, a man's talking now. We're going to listen to him. Chief Inspector Walter Dew was put on the case. And, and again, Walter Dew took his time because, again, he wasn't hugely convinced that, these bohemian people tend to do unorthodox things. And maybe she has just kind of run off somewhere. And so he just started interviewing people. And then eventually he interviewed Crippen. And it was after he interviewed Crippen that he realized, something's amiss here.
And so at that point, the police are involved, the investigation ensues, her body is discovered, and basically the most damning thing is that Crippen and his mistress, who we haven't talked about, or wife at this point, Ethel, they dramatically flee town, which is as well as an admission, like basically an admission of guilt. Like once they know that they're going to be caught, they kind of leave. And there's this, you write it very well in the book. People can read about the chase and going across, and then he's captured in Newfoundland, I think, in Canada.
He's captured in Quebec.
In Quebec, right.
Oh, where? Where are you?
I'm in central Canada, in Saskatchewan, but I'm from the East Coast. So I was excited to read about Quebec and about Newfoundland. I thought, Canada's in this story.
Yeah, Canada's really in the story. And Canada's in the story again when, we haven't talked about Ethel, but Ethel makes her return to Montreal and Quebec City and Toronto.
I was excited. Well, this story, like it's all parts of the U.S. They're in California, they're in New York, then they get to England and then Canada. People are crisscrossing. And now for a quick advertising break.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. There are many ways to entice a potential new customer with flashy branding and calculated marketing strategies. But at the end of the day, the success of a business comes down to the ability to close the sale. And for businesses like Thrive Cosmetics, Allbirds, or Skims, it's what goes on behind the scenes, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple that makes the difference. For them and for millions of businesses, that difference is made with Shopify. Businesses that want to grow, grow with Shopify. Because if your goal is growth, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And Shopify will make sure you're ready. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. And with Shop Pay, they boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. It's no wonder Shopify is home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/realm. I love a multi-use beauty product, like an eye/cheek/lipstick. It makes a full face so much easier, plus you only need to bring one product along for touch-ups. And whether you're all about simple mascara and gloss, or you love to play with bold shapes and colors, you gotta have that trusty favorite you turn to for every look. Thrive Cosmetics makes certified 100% vegan and cruelty-free products you can depend on for everything from simple daily wear to show-stopping self-expression. And it's all made with clean, skin-loving ingredients, high-performance and trademarked formulas, and uncompromising standards. And Thrive Cosmetics is beauty that gives back. For every product purchased, they make a donation towards 8 major causes, including social justice organizations and those impacted by cancer and homelessness. It feels good knowing that when I purchase a product, I'm also able to give back to causes that matter to me. And one product I love from Thrive Cosmetics is the Brilliant Eye Brightener. Like I said, I love a product that can have multiple uses, and the Brilliant Eye Brightener is just that. It's an eyeshadow and highlighter stick that's super blendable, and I'm slowly but surely stocking up on the 31 shades that it comes in. Try your new trusty favorites with an exclusive set for our listeners. New customers can get the Liquid Lash Extensions mascara and a mini-sized Brilliant Eye Brightener at a special set price with free shipping available at thrivecosmetics.com/thrive. Or save more with 20% off your first order at thrivecosmetics.com/thrive. That's Thrive Cosmetics, CAUSEMETICS.com/thrive for 20% off your first order.
Get ready for Netflix's gripping new medical drama, Pulse. Set in a cutting-edge Miami trauma center, third-year resident Dr. Danny Sims is unexpectedly thrust into a promotion when beloved Chief Resident Dr. Xander Phillips gets suspended. Then, with the emotional and physical stakes at their highest, a storm will push the hospital and its residents to their limits. Witness how life can change in a heartbeat when you're operating under pressure. Watch Pulse, only on Netflix.
And we're back. But just to get back to the music hall ladies, basically Crippen is caught. Ethel, his wife/mistress/typist, they're caught. They're put on trial, and the music hall ladies show up there. They testify at the trial.
Yes. So this was also, I mean, there's another way in which they participate. I mean, they are there all the way through, which I think is amazing. So Crippen and Ethel, they abscond together, they get on a ship, but the important thing is they are actually disguised as father and son. And so, Ethel is running around in boys' clothes and with her hair cut short. And, that's quite a dramatic and shocking thing itself. And the entire world is, this story has broken and everybody's following it. And one of the interesting things is when it was decided that they were on a ship, Now, the president of the Music Hall Ladies Guild, Isabel Jeanette, was at the time in New York. They were touring in the United States. So she led a campaign stateside to try to catch Crippen if he was on one of those ships. And so she got Belle's sisters who were living in Brooklyn together, and they created like this dragnet. And every day they would go down with the police to the ports and like examine all the people getting off the ships to see if they could recognize Crippen, day after day after day. And then, of course, it was discovered that they were on the ship, then the ship was bound for Quebec. And so they called off that particular part of the search. But Mrs. Jeanette then got on a train when Crippen was caught in Quebec, got on a train and was there to positively identify him and also to identify all of Belle's jewelry, which he had taken with him. So she was needed to be as someone who could positively identify all the stuff. But then this carries on. Obviously, the women during the trial played an incredibly important role in that they testified. They wanted to ensure Crippen's guilt, and they all testified at the trial. And what I really like about this is at this time, you have to think that women were not allowed to practice as barristers, solicitors, were not allowed in the police force, were not allowed to participate in the justice system at all. So the closest they could get was being a witness at a trial. And it was so interesting how many women, and this is one of the things that got me really curious about the story in the first place, was I realized how many female witnesses there were in Crippen's trial. I mean, there was a huge number of women who testified. And, they all played a really important role in this. They were also played a really important role in identifying her remains, which was incredibly grueling for all of them. And they all talked about the psychological impact of that on them. And Lillian Nash had to take sick leave from performing. They were really traumatized by the whole experience in general. But then they also thought, well, they paid for her burial, they paid for her headstone, for her funeral, for everything. And then finally, they got the law changed. So in the UK, in England at the time, and it was a real omission in the law, it was possible for someone who had killed their spouse to then inherit their property and then pass it on to whoever they wanted to pass it on to. So obviously, Crippen was found guilty of murdering Belle. He was due to inherit all of her property, and he was going to then bequeath it to Ethel, who was really kind of behind the plans. And the Music Hall Ladies Guild said, absolutely no way is this going to happen. And so they challenged this in court, and they got the law changed. So if you murder your spouse in the UK, you cannot claim their property.
These women, I'm so impressed by them. Everything that you talk about in your book, and then you just explained here, just the perseverance. And you described Belle as, when she decided to do something, she went all in. And her friends were the same. When they decided, they're going to get this guy, they're going to prove she was murdered, they're going to prove that her husband did it. And they all of them, they were just so committed to it on both sides of the Atlantic. It's just such... I mean, obviously this sort of story of a murder and the tragedy of it, but I found this part so moving and so heartening, especially the part that they eventually got this law changed. I just think it's great in a time when, as you described, women, all they could do was testify and just lobby, and they did so extremely successfully.
Yeah, exactly. I know it's really, really impressive. It also took an enormous personal toll on all of them. They were quite traumatized. They said they remembered this for the rest of their life. They were exhausted. They got sick. It's you can't underestimate this. There was an enormous personal cost involved in this as well. This wasn't just Belle was this terrible person that these journalists and writers would later assert she was. And the reason they did that was because the only story they were drawing from was Crippen's description of how he and Belle didn't get on. Now, Crippen was a proven liar. He perjured himself on the stand numerous times. He was a snake oil salesman. He was a con man. He was a grifter. And so, like, people just took his story and just said, oh, well, he must be telling the truth. His wife was horrible. What he was doing was he was defending himself. Should he be found guilty, then it could be, what he was seen to have done, could be considered having killed her out of duress, that he was this henpecked husband, and therefore they might not have given him the death penalty. But that wasn't what they found. The evidence against him was utterly compelling, and the jury convicted him in less than 30 minutes. But this story remained because it was a really good story. Man murders impossible woman. But, she was loved. And if she wasn't loved, her friends would not have fought for her the way they did.
And then I think part of the legacy of her story is Ethel. So who you talk about a whole lot in the book. We don't need to get into her today, although she did show up in Canada, as you mentioned. Canada, in this era, there's a lot of criminals hiding here. I've talked about this on some other episodes. But Ethel was found not guilty, and because she really presented herself as like, oh, I'm just this young woman under his thrall. I didn't know what he was doing, etc. And then she shared her story, which was also very unflattering to Belle. And that's part of where sort of the legacy comes from as well, right?
I mean, the two criminals, the two people involved in the murder, tell the story of Belle Elmore, and that's what sticks. So it's interesting. I mean, Ethel's story, not to go into it, but just to say, Ethel is like the foil to Belle in this story. Again, these are two actually very complex women, and Ethel's story is very complex and very multi-layered. And I find her a fascinating person, very dark person. But Belle and Ethel are sort of like opposites, are foils in many ways.
And it does also, I mean, Ethel is very young also when Crippen meets her. And so you kind of see like, oh, he likes a young, malleable woman. And he's not so much fond of a mature woman with a fully formed, frontal lobe or whatever.
But he likes these, and I'm saying this with air quotes, girls. He likes girls. But what he also likes, what's really surprising, he likes women with really strong personalities. So although Ethel portrays herself as a wallflower, she's this like quiet, reserved and as she is described, slightly hysterical woman. Oh, she is not that at all. There is something else underneath, which is like a lioness. And that comes out. It comes out a lot. And Belle is an incredibly strong woman. And even his first wife, Charlotte, to have done what she did, she had 2 careers before the age of 30. In the Victorian era, when women did not have careers, she had started her life as a teacher and then became a nurse and immigrated under, terrible circumstances from Ireland to the United States and started her life over again in New York and then out west. And my God, what sort of like incredibly tough character do you have to be to do that? Resilient. And I mean, all of these women, the resilience is extraordinary. And that's one of the things that made me really want to write this story.
And this is part of where I'm glad that you're the one who wrote this story, because of the way that you focus and you give all 3 women their complexity and their humanity, and really digging down to like prove what they were really like, how they move through the world. A lot's been written about Crippen before, but what you bring to this that's new and what's different is, well, especially Belle, just kind of like explaining who she was. I love that the cover of the book is just her. That just to show this is the story of her, a person, a vivacious, lovely person. Not this, like I wouldn't call this a true crime book at all.
It's really a history book with,
exactly.
And I say this in the introduction, and I'm a historian, I'm a social historian. And what I find what has actually brought me to true crime is not the crime itself. It's the amount of documentation that a crime throws up for a historian and the incredible insight you can get from the paperwork about how people lived their lives.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast today. It's really such a treat to talk to you. I'm such a fan of your work, and I think this book is just brilliant. And I hope that this interview gets a whole lot more people. Lots of people are already reading your book, but even more people will read your book, hopefully, from our conversation.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
So again, could not recommend this book anymore. It's such a good read. In addition to everything we got into in this episode, which I hope, entices you to want to read the book, because that's like one plot strand in the whole thing, because the book also gets into how this crime was solved, like more details about all of the women's lives. It also talks about kind of how the crime probably happened and the aftermath, and it's involving stuff. And we mentioned in the episode, like, we're in New York City, we're in California, we're in London, we get to Quebec. I think Toronto is there at one point. Like, it's crisscrossing back and forth over the Atlantic. But just the way that the way that Hallie describes, the way that kind of the suspense of, this is going to happen, but how is it going to happen? Then the investigation, the chase for Dr. Crippen, like, it's also cinematic. And I'm so happy that it's going to be adapted into a TV series, because I think, even more so than a movie, like a TV series, you can really get into all these really cinematic moments that happen in it. And Hallie tells it so well. And if you can't tell, I am obsessed with this book and I love it. And I think it's great. Story of a Murder, The Wives, the Mistress, and Dr. Crippen. It's available all over the place. So it's available in the UK, Commonwealth territories. It's available in North America, hopefully other places as well. And I really recommend you read it. And if you read it, let me know what you think. And so, in terms of this podcast, I am excited to let you know also that so starting next week, we're going to be diving back into our Marie Antoinette season. What is this? It's like season 7, part 3, I guess. It's the Women of the Revolution. Starting next week, we're going to be looking every week for the next several weeks about different women revolutionaries, women who are involved in the French Revolution on the revolution side. And it's a complex thing. And I think it's gratifying to me that some of the same people we've talked about before in both the American Revolution parts of this season, as well as in when we were looking at what was happening in France, like Lafayette is showing up, like the Chevalier St. George is there, like obviously Marie Antoinette comes up a bunch, but the season is kind of starting to, all these disparate parts of the Marie Antoinette season are kind of starting to get closer to each other. I'm making a gesture with my hands you can't see. I'm moving my hands slowly closer together with my fingers outstretched, and eventually the fingers are going to all interconnect. So this part of the series, I'm really excited to tell you these stories as well, because again, a lot of these women, kind of like Belle Elmore, what they actually did has some overlap with what they're remembered for doing, but not entirely overlap. Like, a lot of them got sort of lost in these myths and legends of these female revolutionaries, and we'll be looking for the next several weeks. I don't want to say exactly because I keep finding more revolutionary women I want to talk about, but it's going to be at least 6 or 7 weeks. And that's starting next week. Although I will say, coming up on Friday, it's going to be another Canadian Heritage Minute episode. And well, I'll have a special announcement in that episode. So Friday, Canadian Heritage Minute with a special episode about the Canadian Heritage Minutes. And then next Wednesday, Women of the Revolution, get ready. There's a lot of heads being chopped off that we're going to be talking about on this podcast coming up really soon. And so actually, I'm going to say one more thing, which is that after we finished recording, I was telling Hallie about my book that I have coming out next year about Caroline of Brunswick, Rebel of the Regency, and how it kind of, the way that Belle Elmore was presented and was kind of often popularly thought of as just this kind of like messy, annoying woman who kind of deserved to be murdered. It reminded me so much of the legacy of Caroline of Brunswick, who's often, until my book comes out, still thought of as this kind of like smelly, annoying mess. Anyway, and so she and I were just commiserating for a bit about how women's stories are so often just fall victim, especially women who are outspoken or who step outside the norm. Maybe there's people who support them during their life, but after they die, it's their legacies can often be handled by the men who hate them and the patriarchy that doesn't want to remember that women like that ever existed. So anyway, just another connection between that book and my book. And if you want to know the latest, what's happening, things are happening. Pre-orders are going to be happening soon for my book, Rebel of the Regency. The way that you can get updates on that and everything else that I'm up to, like in-person appearances where I'm going to be going to Toronto this summer. You can get all the news about that in my mailing list newsletter. So if you sign up for my mailing list, I send out an email once per month. It's not overwhelming at all. It's kind of like the top hits of like what I'm up to, because I know I'm up to a lot. And if you just want to know the major breaking news, so you can sign up for your Vulgar History news, your Anne Foster news, your Canadian Heritage Minutes news. Go to vulgarhistory.com/news. And I put the link here in the show notes as well, so you can sign up for that. If nothing else, that's the way that you can keep up with what I'm up to. I also have a Substack, vulgarhistory.substack.com, where I'm kind of busy at the moment. I'm on a le petite hiatus from Substack while I finish like writing my book. But anyway, that's where I post essays about women from history. It's usually something like every other week. There's a thing there that you can read. You can also, if you want even more updates from me, not just the once a month email, you want more, you want all the details. So I have a Patreon. So how Patreon works is basically you subscribe to get my updates. And if you do that, like, you can become a free member. And then what you'll see there is I post questions there. I post some audio things there. I'm going to be posting I have been posting free episodes there for everybody who joins the Patreon, just updates about me and my book and what's going on. I just didn't Ask Me Anything a couple weeks ago with questions from people from the Patreon. And I think I'll be doing an Ask Me Anything probably every month or so, just because there's so much to tell you. And I want to share all this information with people who want to hear it. And also just because of, I've talked about this before, but like just social media in general, it's kind of like everyone's on different social media. And then like, you're just like a victim of the algorithm. Do people see the things you post? Not always. Anyway, so if you actually want to know what I'm up to, you can join my Patreon for free. Patreon.com/Anne Foster Writer. And if you're like, but then do I have to go to the website every day? It's like, no, you'll get like updates, like either in the app or just in your email when I post something there. And if you want to bump things up, where if you pledge for $1 or more a month, you will get early ad-free access to all episodes of Vulgar History. And if you're like, but I don't want to have to go to the app to listen to the podcast, you don't, because once you join it, you can connect Patreon, your paid or free membership, with wherever you listen to your podcasts on. If it's Spotify or if it's Apple Podcasts or YouTube, whatever, you can connect those so that you can get. So the podcast episodes just land in your little podcast thing without you. Well, I mean, you have to make the connection, but once that connection is done, which is easy to do, they just land there just early and without the ads in the middle and beginning and end, and also early. And if you pledge my $5 or more a month on the Patreon, you also get access to the whole back catalog of bonus episodes, Vulgar Piece Theater, where I talk about costume dramas, So This Asshole, where I talk about awful men from history. And I will say, as I've been reading about women from the French Revolution, I've got 2 new So This Asshole candidates who I will be yelling about. And so this asshole episode is probably pretty soon, because these guys keep showing up and just fucking up all these women's lives. Anyway, and then also when you join the $5 or more a month category, then you also get access to our Discord, which is just like a big group chat for people who are into this podcast and into history and talking about shows and just having a nice time. Basically, it's another way. Like, I love to find ways to stay in touch with the Tits Out Brigade, and the Discord, I find it's a really nice place to do that. And that's available for people who join the Patreon at $5 a month or more. And if you're looking for some jewelry, we do have our brand partner, Common Era Jewelry, which I know a lot of people are being mindful these days about where the products that they purchase are coming from and that sort of thing. And so I saw Tori, the owner of Common Era Jewelry, was posting like their stuff is manufactured all in America. So if you're in America, who knows? The tariffs shouldn't be affecting this. It's all made there. So this is 100% women-owned business using 100% recycled gold. Their gold pieces are all made to order, so there's no waste. Like, she's only making things when people order them. Pieces are made entirely in New York City. Everyone involved has healthcare and good wages. Even the packaging is made by a lovely little family-owned business in Chicago. And it's not just like, oh, wow, what a nice company. It's like beautiful jewelry as well. So what Tori makes these beautiful designs that are inspired by women from history, and also from just kind of like the vibes of history, especially like the Common Era, like classical era. So I've talked before, they have gorgeous designs inspired by women from history and myth. They also have a new zodiac jewelry collection inspired by an obscure 17th century alchemical manuscript, reimagining zodiac jewelry through the lens of ancient alchemical wisdom. Their pieces are beautiful. They're available in solid gold as well as in more affordable gold vermeil. I will say that the zodiac collection, last time I looked, because I have been keeping an eye on this myself for personal reasons, the gold vermeil it's not quite there yet, but you can go on a wait list for the zodiac jewelry in gold vermeil. And Vulgar History listeners can always get 15% off all items from Common Era by going to commonera.com/vulgar or using code vulgar at checkout. That's 15% off everything at Common Era by going to commonera.com/vulgar or using code vulgar at checkout. And if you want to support this show by getting merchandise, that is available at vulgarhistory.com/store. It takes you to our recently redesigned store. So it's still TeePublic is like the company that does it, but now their site is called like the Dashery. And it just kind of looks nicer. It's a bit easier to browse, I find. Like it's just kind of like, here's all the designs. You click on the design, and then from the design, you can choose which product you want, like a sticker, do you want a t-shirt, whatever. That's for Americans, vulgarhistory.com/store. If you're outside the US, the shipping is better. And that includes Canada. Like vulgarhistory.com/store is great for people who are in America. Literally any other country in the world, including that like island just off the coast of Australia where all the penguins live who have to pay the tariffs now. vulgarhistory.redbubble.com is your friend there. If you want to get in touch with me, go to vulgarhistory.com. There's a little contact me form, and that sends an email to me, and then I will read your email, but you can also reach me via DM on Instagram, and you can follow me on Blue Sky and Instagram and Threads and LinkedIn. I don't know. And this is where just like what's happening. What is social media? Follow me on Patreon. Frankly, that's where I'm posting the most stuff. Anyway, if you're in Canada, there is an election coming up, and I want to make sure that my vote counts as best it can. And by which I mean, for me, I'm supporting anyone who is not Pierre Poilievre. And so if you want to figure out kind of where should you vote, should you vote for the NDP? Should you vote for the Liberal Party? Like, how is your riding leaning? Like, which makes sense if there's not a vote split. So if you go to smartvoting.ca is a website where you can type in your postal code, and it'll kind of look at your riding and kind of how the polls are going to help you decide who to vote for. Because it's, as we're all seeing in the world right now, it's really important to vote, and to vote for someone who you think is going to support the things that are important to you. And for me, that's anyone other than Pierre Poilievre is who I want to vote for. Anyway, so Friday we've got a Canadian Heritage Minute and a special Canadian Heritage Minute special announcement. Next week, French Revolution, Liberté, Sororité, just heads are going to cut off. These women are like, we're all, sans culottes, which doesn't mean it means no knickers, but you're wearing long trousers. But to me, it just really sounds like people are out there Winnie the Poohing it, not wearing pants. So we're going sans culottes, we're going tits out, we're going elbows up. And so I'll talk to you on Friday for the Canadian episode. And the next week, we're getting back into the French Revolution. And everybody should really, 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 really read Story of a Murder, The Wives, the Mistress, and Dr. Crippen by Hallie Rubenhold. And I'll talk to you all next time. Vulgar History is researched, written, and hosted by Anne Foster. That's me. The editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severn Duo. The Vulgar History Show image is by Deborah Wong. Transcripts are written by Aveline Malik. Find transcripts of recent episodes at vulgarhistory.com.
What's up, fellow TV watchers? It's Brian from The Core Podcast, where we cover all things Apple TV+. We are wrapping up our recaps of Emmy favorite Severance, but 2025 on Apple TV Plus is just getting started. In April and May, The Core is recapping Seth Rogen's new Hollywood satire, The Studio, and Jon Hamm's dark comedy, Your Friends and Neighbors. We'll also be recapping the first 2 seasons of Apple's sci-fi thriller, Foundation, heading into the 3rd season of that later this year. Search for The Core, all things Apple TV Plus, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
Can you actually change your personality if you want to? How does peer pressure work, and why is it so powerful? Should you ever really trust your gut when you make a big decision? These are just a few of the topics we've recently covered on my podcast, Something You Should Know. I'm the host, Mike Carruthers, and each episode of Something You Should Know covers multiple topics that are likely relevant to you. You'll discover things you can use in your life today, right now, like how to have a great conversation, how to be more courageous, the anatomy of the perfect apology, and much, much more. To date, there are over 1,000 episodes of Something You Should Know, and we've gotten over 4,000 mostly 5-star reviews. I invite you to check out Something You Should Know. Look for the bright yellow light bulb on the blue background. Something You Should Know, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome to Gotham, Jimmy. It's not as bad as it looks.
DC and Realm present.
Our vigilante, or Batman as he's called, possesses extraordinary physical skill.
DC High Volume Batman. Fear. I have to make them afraid. I shall become a bat.
Look there. What the hell?
The Dark Knight's definitive DC Comics stories.
He's got a motorcycle. Get after him or I'll have you shot.
Take him down.
Adapted directly for audio for the very first time.
Thinks he's a damn Robin Hood. He dies.
Looks like it's just you and me now, Phil Cooney.
Hit the floodlight. It's showtime. New episodes every Wednesday. Follow and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Batman hasn't attacked anybody. What do you mean, blow up the building?
From this moment on, none of you are safe. DC High Volume Batman. Available now.